They never believe me. No matter how I tell them, it always ends the same way. I heard the footsteps of the orderly walk down to the hallway, slow and steady, and only when he passed I dared to peer through the blurred window in the door. Other than a barred window, only a flickering fluorescent light in the hallway being the only source of light. My room was dark, and my roommate was passed out, drooling. A loud, growling snore echoed through the room, and with an arm hanging off the bed from a high dose of medication. It was the quietest and most peaceful I'd seen him be since I got here. Other than an unknown dripping coming from a neglected faucet, the facility had gone uncharacteristically quiet. Normally, I'd hear snoring or babbling from one resident or another. I was being rewarded for my good behavior. I accepted any medication they offered me, hiding it while I held my mouth open, moving my tongue to show I had swallowed them, and spat them out later, giving the slimy remnants to my roommate, who was only too happy to take them. I'd be taken to a therapist session, acting nice and peaceful now, and no longer needing a burly, dumb orderly on either side, or be sedated with a large needle, with a sedative being injected into my right butt cheek. The closed door had a bronze sign with Dr. Nosov. The orderly knocked on the door before a polite, "Come in," called out, and soon I was seated across a large wooden desk made of oak or some other expensive wood, polished and spotless. Decorating the wall were awards and accolades with bookcases filled with books that were solely to make this dim-witted simpleton look more intelligent than he actually was. On his polished desk, with a laptop, a lamp, and his nameplate, all were expected. He sat in an expensive leather-clad chair in a white dress shirt, a plaid tie, and otherwise his clothing was forgettable. His dark hair was gelled, styled, and a smug smirk as soulless eyes gazed through thick glasses. Hands that were softer than a baby's ass tapped fingertips together before they rested on the table. "Jonathan, good to see you. How do you feel today?" His smooth voice, dripping with a fake, condescending tone, greeted me. Nosov was goading me to react again. I couldn't risk it. Not again. I had to get out of here. "I'm doing better, Dr. Nosov. One day at a time." I smiled at him, and his rose to match mine. I guess I'd best indulge in stereotypical social pleasantries. "How are you, Doctor?" "I'm well. This isn't about me." He smiled. I think he was satisfied by it. "You've been here for..." He opened my file, rubbed his chin in thought, and flicked through a few pages, a finger pinpointing the exact date I was involuntarily submitted into this cursed facility. "Let's see. You've been here for 6 months now, and you had He paused, making it point to look at me firmly. "Incident earlier in the year. I wouldn't call fighting for my life a mere incident. The memory of me seeing that glint in his eye, the shadow, and I knew it was there. It had been hunting me for many years, and I'd always been able to evade it. Only now, I was trapped. It was lurking inside him." I grabbed a pen off his desk, clenched it in my fist, and leapt across the table, screaming that he'd never get me again. He bellowed at me to get off him. Rage and my physical strength held him down until the spirits took control and threw me across the room. I struck the wall, winding me, and fell to the floor, clutching my arms around my stomach protectively. The 2 orderlies ran in with a sedative ready to go. Before I knew it, I was injected in the butt cheek. Instantly, a warm feeling flooded my body, and I fell limp, occasionally drifting in and out of consciousness with their faces looming over me. I couldn't understand what they were saying. All their words merged together. They strapped me to the bed, and I struggled to break free. I remember calling to be released, telling them that I needed to get out of here, that he was here, and why couldn't they see what he was? I stared up at the ceiling, in and out of consciousness, all for hours on end. My throat ached from calling out, the weightless feeling. The door opened, and I saw that same arrogant face of the doctor standing over me. "You'll feel better soon. I'm going to help you, even if you don't understand it now." Frozen in place, I couldn't move away from him when a hand reached over to rest on my forehead. A blubbering line of drool added to the indignity, and I felt a wetness on my drawstring pants informed me my bladder had failed me. It didn't happen since very early childhood. It had never occurred to me previously, and I felt a wave of shame pass over me. What was in the injection? He leaned close, hovering nearly 2 inches away, studying my face, and looked in the direction of my crotch. "Oh, dear." He comforted me with false sincerity, a slow, condescending shake of his head. "It looks like you've made a mess. Don't worry, Jonathan." I wanted to tell him to go to hell, but all that came out was an irate ramble. My tongue felt too big for my mouth. Only a garbled mess came out, and I stared up at him. Enraged, my limbs no longer moved, no matter how intensely I tried. It didn't bother him. Only a flicker of the corner of his lips told me how he felt, and he smiled while his eyes remained unchanged. Turning on his heel, he left without looking back toward me, and when he reached the door, said, "I'll send the nurse in to bathe you. Soon." He left. I knew soon it would be anything but. Not being able to do it myself was agony. I felt trapped in my mind and body. Soon turned out to be the next day in the early afternoon. By this time, the stench was inescapable. I could move now, and my back was stiff with the thin mattress. I was being punished, and helpless, my mind raced to escape my imprisonment. Bed sores were coming up on my back, and the urine stain left a red mark. The stern-faced nurse entered, who ignored my parched mouth requests for water, and cleaned me, roughly rubbing my skin raw. I wanted to do it myself. She wouldn't look at my face, nor address me, and I felt inhuman, no longer worth caring for. That night, I was freed, leaning up and caused everything to ache, bathing myself and wondering why this was happening to me. They didn't ask how I was feeling. The same stern-faced nurse told me to make my way to the break room. My back creaked and I dawdled, while my muscles ached and hunched over. I made my way there. It was difficult to tell who belonged there and whose mind had been broken. Pushing the memory aside, I blushed and lowered my head. I didn't regret attacking him in the slightest, but I regretted the humiliation I endured. I wanted to survive. "Yes, that again. I'm sorry. It shouldn't have happened," I answered, hoping that I was convincing. "Oh," he dismissed with a casual wave of his hand. "Water under the bridge. It is important to get you better. That's my only concern. Now, how have you been adjusting to the new medication?" The doctor asked, still with some of the papers in their hands, and placed them down on the table. I couldn't view them without leaning across to check them out. Since I hadn't been taking it, I shrugged. My hand rested on my stomach. "It's been giving me nausea, and my appetite isn't what it was. Nothing bad, though, since so many medications could potentially give me nausea. It was the perfect alibi." He smiled, placed the papers down, and picked up his Lamy pen, scribbling down some notes concerning my response. Good. Now, How about your mind? How are we doing up there? Blurry. Sometimes my memories aren't what they should be. They're less intrusive. But I'd say that my mind is clearer. I asked, not wanting to rock the boat by asking if I could leave and go home. Revenge. That felt like a luxury. I just wanted to escape, be safe, and regain my personhood. Again, he scribbled down his notes. You're making progress, and I've been here for quite a few months now, and I'm pleased you trust the treatment. He started, turning 2 pages, and exhaled. How was the group therapy with Dr. Anderson going? I hated talking about my problems with people at the best of times. Dr. Henderson was a foolish hippie with no grasp in reality. Every word she spoke was like daggers in my ears. However, I spoke about smaller, trivial issues that I dealt with long ago. My troubled childhood with my neglectant parents, who were more focused on getting their next fix than looking after their child. Henderson and the other residents lapped it up, offering me their sympathies and congratulated me on my bravery for telling my story. It is a struggle, listening to and sharing my story. I answered, scoffed and smiled. My leg rocked occasionally, trying to look as hesitant as possible. His stare was long, bordering on predatory, and he knew I was concealing something from him. Which part in particular caused you the most stress? The question probing. This time, I wasn't lying, and being forced to confront these memories was difficult. The pause I gave was natural, involuntary. Speaking about how I was taken as a teenager, my response was honest. Speaking of vulnerable memories always placed me in a state of uncertainty. They were a jumbled mess, sections in vivid detail while other parts remained elusive. I couldn't remember most of them, and perhaps I should have. I saw his eyebrows raise at my response, a scribble of his pen, and glanced back up at me. Do you want to talk about it? No. The obvious answer. I knew he was guiding me toward it, all to see how much I knew about him. I frowned, turning my head away, yet I knew what happened when I didn't comply. Being stuck in that room was hell. Finally, I found my voice. It isn't easy for me. My voice sounded like the 17-year-old I was, rather than the 40-year-old man that I am. Another pause, my mouth suddenly feeling dry, and I swallowed a thick mouthful of saliva. I was walking to school. My mom had to go to work early that morning, so she couldn't drive me. I wanted to walk, though. The path borders on a forest, and I walked down that road countless times before. The more I spoke, the more memories flooded back, and I felt I was right there, experiencing what I was telling him. I could smell the aroma of the cedar trees by the road, the condensation from my breath, and the chill air on my cheeks. I was wearing my high school jersey, my pride and joy, the brawling Badgers, and I wore it nearly everywhere. I was drawn into it all, feeling a bitter chill on my hands and face. I forgot my gloves. I remember that. I stared down at my hands in the real world, staring at my palms and closing my fingers to place them back down on my lap. They were in my pockets. I didn't want to have to go back home to get them. The memory world and his office blurred into one. He was somehow here. Keep going. You're doing well. I wanted to believe him. I could hear the crunch of my feet on the road, smash the orange leaves as fall had claimed the land. Birds let out their loud calls, and I glanced over at them, seeing one standing on a wooden fence, watching me and tilting its head to one side in assumed curiosity at me. And the birds stopped chirping. The bird landed on the spot before breaking into loud squawking before flying away with the others. I figured it was a wolf, or maybe I got too close. I'm unsure. I looked behind me, seeing nothing there, but I can't explain it. Instinct. I had to get out of there and nearly stumbled, breaking into a jog. Something told me I needed to escape before it got me. I was so caught up in recollecting that I nearly didn't see his top lip raised on the left side. Not once did he willingly break eye contact with me. The satisfaction, the fear, and I hated how now I couldn't stop. My heart rate and breath both increased, feeling the adrenaline course through my veins, and the office completely passed away. My legs twitched and trembled, moving up and down, eager to stand up. I paused, worried about continuing. There's a row of abandoned houses by the side of the road. Sometimes there were crackheads in there. My words slow, so absorbed in the memory, and I couldn't look at him. My gaze focused on the floor. I remember seeing the high school and other students walking. I put my hand up and called out to them. I was popular. I had friends. Most of whom soon left when dealing with my conditions became too difficult to cope with. My unwillingness to talk, my isolation, no more training. I simply existed. I stopped being me, so I understood. No words came out when I called for them. I waved, only to have them walk away. My fists clenched. The rage was building up. I felt him close to me, standing over me, but I couldn't see it yet. I felt like it was finally spilling over, seizing control of me, overriding my body, and my lips curled backward with tears of anger, not realizing I was now on the edge of my seat. I felt it. I felt its hands circle around my body, only it has multiplied and dragged me into one of those houses. The whites of my eyes showed. I was dragged through the dirt, and only my right shoe was left behind. The only piece of evidence I had gone missing. And through the memory, I saw Dr. Nosov's large, monstrous grin. Without control of myself, I let out a roar and lunged myself over the desk at him, wrapping my hand around his throat while punching him in the face. Once, twice, I kept going, endlessly breaking bone. You remembered me, how kind. The entity's bellow taunted me, mocking me, and spurts of blood rose to the sky with every punch I gave. I let out a roar of indignity. The orderlies both pulled me off. This time they struck me with a security baton to disarm me. A coarse Boston accent taunted me. He's the only one who gives a shit about you. That same sedative was injected into me. Only this time, a secondary dose did the same. And as a last resort, a third dose was given. The office was in chaos. I was secured and lifted up. With the last sight I saw of the doctor was his unconscious body, laying with his nose broken and blood coating his face. 2 nurses were tending to the wounds, oblivious to what was harbored inside him, and glaring at me as though I were the monster. I fully expected to be punished for what I had done. In the brief moments of consciousness, I realized I had been placed in solitary confinement with those padded walls. The air was stale, barely breathable, and I could smell the foul stink of my body. No care had been given. I could taste the metallic, dried blood in my mouth and wondered if it would heal properly. I lost feeling in my feet, with small errors that hurt. A bedsheet not placed down properly, causing my back to become bruised. I was drugged the whole time, Unable to even whisper and staring at the ceiling, I wondered whether or not I'd see the doctor. Yet, he didn't show. "What happened to him?" I drawled out to one of the orderlies. Feebly, I tried to grab his trousers, trying to gain his attention. "Where is he? Where's the doctor?" "You did a good job on him, John." He glared down at me. Sure, they thought I was crazy, but now I could see the pure contempt in his eyes. "You put him in intensive care." I blinked, knowing he had certainly received a beating and would have definitely needed to go to the ER. But intensive care? I couldn't have done that much damage. Could I? "No," I murmured, releasing his trouser leg from my hand. My attention moved back to the ceiling, blinking, and I noticed he still stood by me. Too still, standing hunched over and blankly staring at me. Weak muscles twisted in the restraints. He was among those who had beaten me, causing my ribs to ache, and I was sure one had been broken. His face barely an inch from mine. His hand held my head firm, forcing open my eyelids and shining a small flashlight in them. I squeezed my eyes tight and felt his hand move down my chest, then along the injured side. My skin instinctively pulled away from his touch, only for him to give a light punch to the injured rib. My body seized up, and I yelled out. A second one landed on my stomach, and I kept pulling. My wrists bruised and cut from my attempts to escape. Winded, gasping with an aching empty stomach, I groaned with my teeth grit tight together, and I longed for the pain to subside. After that, he left me in pain. I was unable to escape. This time, I craved the sedation, wishing to escape the raw agony I continued to feel. The days blurred into one. I could feel the shaggy, unkempt facial hair growing on my skin. The condition I was in disturbed me. My body felt hot, useless sweat coated me, and I knew an infection had taken hold of my body. It would be slow and painful, yet at least I would pass from this place. The same nurse entered, bringing a bucket and a rag to wash me. She wasn't gentle and coarsely rubbed my already red skin. I winced, gritting my teeth, and tried to indicate for her to stop. Her scrubbing dried filth caused fresh blood to trickle out. The last thing I wanted to do was look into her face. I froze when I realized it was nothing but a blank canvas. Sealed eyes and lips greeted me. Adjoining lips pulled, stretching the skin, and the face was close to mine. A webbed hand rested on my forehead before pointing a device at my forehead. It beeped. It examines the result without eyes. A muffled mumble came from the concealed maw. Once, twice, and finally, she left. This time, leaving the door open to the empty hallway. Not that I could use the opportunity. Still restrained and muscles deteriorated, I felt weak as a kitten. A shadowed outline peeked past the door. I could barely see it, and I couldn't discern if it was another patient or perhaps something more devious. Two hands held the door before slipping back, as though nothing had been there. Maybe I truly was losing my mind. I was taken out of the cell and taken down the hallway past the many doors of the other patients. The orderly swore at the fiddly wheel, and I realized they took me to the medical wing. The groans of other sick patients, the intense bright lights that I squinted to avoid and knew deep down that I lacked options. The wide stare of one of my fellows made me realize the horrid condition I was in. What on earth? Doctor. I can't remember her name. Worried, I opened my eyes and saw a human face gazing down at me. My interactions with her had been brief. Doctors and medical personnel have always caused unease, yet after the incident as a child, I avoided them at all costs. I saw her shrink away, despite beginning work on putting a drip in my arm and helping me survive. I'm sorry, I rasped at her about my condition. The stench must have been unbearable. Don't worry, she muttered, the first time I had been addressed for some time. Tenderly, she apologized while trying to ensure I was cleaned and lifted. My skin and the mattress had fused together, causing a procedure to separate the pair of us. I heard her and another nurse whispering to themselves about abuse and malpractice, and still, I doubted anything would happen. I was sedated, this time needing a sizable dose, and the bliss I felt was intoxicating. Unsure which was a dream and what was real, I was temporarily at peace, and feeling relaxed, I didn't hear him approach. Dr. Nozov stood by my bed, except it wasn't him. Quite an achievement, Jonathan. I didn't think you would have survived this long. You've proven to be most resilient, he said. Glancing over, I noticed that no other patients even saw him. I blinked, trying to focus on any trivial item other than him. You're not here. You're in the ER, I stammered, only to have another patient glance sideways at me before minding their own damn business. Admittance of guilt. How charming. My physical body is currently in the ER. You planted some good punches. The taunt came, leaning close, forcing me to look on him, and his features were similar, yet not quite right. His left eye was too large, while his mouth was set too low on his face, his nose twisted to the right, and when he smiled, his canines and incisors were longer and more pointed than the norm. Surprising. I didn't think you had it in you. Perhaps you truly are crazy. I closed my eyes, unable to escape, and my body tensed, wanting to escape. Do you remember your time in the basement all those years ago? I remembered. It was cold, dark, and damp. The walls were coated in thick black mold, and water leaked down from an old pipe. The floor was littered with rotten trash, old broken furniture, and when I realized I was there alone, my ankle and leg had been damaged when I was dragged. My body was burned where it had grabbed me. Ignoring it, my gaze locked on the stairs, the source of my would-be salvation, and crawling, I made my way to damaged stairs leading to freedom. You tried so hard to escape me, didn't you? The world had passed away, and the memory plagued me, unable to escape. No matter how much I crawled on my elbows through the wet filth, I never got any closer to escape. I reached up toward it, and the knowing sank in. I was stuck. Young me lowered my forehead down into the water, exhausted, and my body locked up, still forced to keep my head up to prevent myself from drowning. I should have died down there, only to find I've always been with you. I felt it lurking behind me, every cell twisting in an attempt to escape, only to be seized by the entity. It stripped away parts of me I never knew existed. Muscles dedicated to sports were twisted, pulled beyond repair as bones were snapped and allowed to heal in mismatched shapes. I remembered being found some time later, and despite the expensive surgeries, they never properly healed. My sporting career was over before it truly began. I was forced to watch and cheer for my friends at the sidelines, coupled with my minds that never healed. Soon they became acquaintances, and later I became the target for their mockery. Police and my parents would grill me, needing answers to catch the perpetrator to prevent him from hurting others. How could I tell them that who they were looking for didn't exist? "What do you want?" I whispered, the current face coming into view. It straddled me, and the heaviness on my limbs prevented me from moving. It leaned closer. Finally, I expected it to tell me it wished for me to suffer, for my soul, for something, only for it to disappear. Jumping, I looked from one side to another. The others were sleeping or caught up in their own affairs, while a woman, her hair fuzzy with bald patches missing from ripping it out, her skin pasty from being stuck inside the facility so much, and stared too intently at me. I could not tell if I hadn't noticed, if it were part of her illness, or if it was Nosov. The next day, the administrator of the facility came to sit by me. Her nose wrinkled, her backside barely sitting on the edge of the seat and trying to avoid touching anything a resident did. "Dr. Nosov has graciously offered to drop the charges, if you drop the ones against the hospital." I scoffed and chuckled, shaking my head at her audacity and wondering whether they were scared of me speaking at trial. "And if I don't?" I asked, raising an eyebrow at her. "If you don't, then you will be considered a danger to yourself, the other patients, and the staff. You'll need to go back into solitary confinement." She polished it off with a smug. "For your own good." I wondered if she wanted me to die here. Surely there had to be some, and I wasn't sure if my family would proceed with investigating what happens to me. Still, solitary confinement is how I ended up in this state to begin with, I responded, and not without a note of bitterness. "It sounds like Dr. Nosov is on the road to recovery." She couldn't answer me with that one. Since I was dealing with a bureaucrat, I figured that I'd have to think like one. "I want my own room. No more roommates. I want to be able to roam the garden if I wish to." It was a perk on offer for good behavior, an idle carrot dangling over the heads of the patients in a false hope. I saw her tense up. "I want to see visitors in person." Thus far, I had always pushed them aside, not wishing to allow anyone to see me in this state. She leered, frustrated, and tapped her pen rapidly on the clipboard. "Fair enough. Do you agree to drop charges?" She gave me a new pen, placing it in my hand for me to sign. "I want what I asked for first, and in writing." The worst she could do was kill me. She takes in irritation, and I knew she wanted to be out of here quickly, as though our conditions could somehow spread to her. "You can expect it tomorrow." She stood and left, washing her hands with a small bottle of disinfectant, and quickly made her escape. Discreetly, I hid the pen, my prize beneath me to use for whatever purpose arose. The patient across from me missed nothing with those open eyes gazing at me. The rest of my day was uneventful. I avoided the glances of my peers, and nor did I receive any visitors, spiritual or otherwise. I wasn't left waiting long for her to arrive. 7 a.m. on the dot. She was standing there at the end of my bed, clipboard in hand. "Here, you'll find everything there." She handed it to me. Stumbling and nearly dropping it, I held it up to my face and quickly read the terms. Without legal representation, this would ultimately mean nothing. However, being able to do it filled me with glee. I need a pen, I reminded her with a sarcastic wiggle of my fingers. She handed one over, and I took it in my hand, scribbling with my hand and feeling the ache run up it. How long had it been since I had a pen in my hand? My handwriting looked like a scribble made by an intoxicated crab. She lifted it, stared at it with dismissive eyes, and exhaled rudely. I'll make preparations. You'll have a monitored call with your family and your legal representation. She spun on her heel, leaving me, and I lay back in smug victory. Relearning how to walk and move again has been a struggle. She kept her promise. Everything I asked for, I received. The walks in the garden, my own room, and the freedom to speak with visitors despite my refusal to do so. Holding their secrets over their heads gave me a sense of purpose. I found myself sitting in the meeting room. I nearly didn't recognize him when he walked through. He had gray hair with a drawn-in face and stumbled slowly with his back hunched over. He drawled toward me and waited to be invited to sit. Mostly, the other residents left me alone. Rumors of repeated violent attacks kept them away. Not looking up from my book, I gestured for him to sit and focused on him. It was Nosov. My jaw dropped slightly, and the book lowered to gain a better view at him. His pride was broken, and the sadistic gleam gone from his eyes. His eyes were soft, gentle, and occasionally blinked. I'm sorry, Jonathan. A long inhale and a slow exhale, his voice equally tender. I failed you, and I wanted to say this to you personally. I didn't know, for my part. I'm sorry, and I forgive you for hurting me. I never thought I'd see the day. I lifted the book up and said a simple, unimpressed, "Okay," before returning my gaze back to my book. No, you don't understand. It is real. He swallowed, gaining his nerve. The entity, it is real. And not looking from my book to acknowledge his presence, I answered with the same condescending tone he gave me. Dr. Nosov, carefully say that too, or you may end up being a patient here. He opened his mouth, prepared to speak, before silencing himself, and left the same way he came. I couldn't resist a slow smirk at his expense. No moment of victory before I went back to my room. No roommate, no issues. The orderlies never hassled me anymore. The ones who punched me had been reassigned to other wards. Lifting my shirt to examine my body, running my hand along my chest, the rib was now healed, and I felt my body have a new vigor. Strange. Perhaps the regular sunlight and exercise was aiding me. I noticed some small black dots on the wall I scraped off with my fingernail, realizing it was mold. Wrinkling my nose with distaste, I walked through the room until I found one of the nurses. "Excuse me, I think I saw mold growing in my room," I complained. The hospital, like many others, were short-staffed, and most residents who were able would assist with cleaning. She nodded her understanding, not looking at me, and getting back to dealing with another patient. I went outside into the garden, a place few fellow residents would walk through, and found my favorite spot. A bench with nice late afternoon sunlight. Walking toward it and sitting down, I ran my hand through the flowers, noticing brown parts on the edges and an overall wilt. It didn't happen anywhere else other than the place I sat down at. Standing up, I noticed a flock of birds seated with an elderly resident who had been here since the 40s. I never bothered to remember her name, figuring the old bag would either outlive us or fall dead tomorrow. All the birds squawked when they saw me, loudly, and it hurt my ears. I turned my head away. It reminded me of that day. Finally, Jonathan, it's time for us to have some fun. The words came. Bending down, I picked up a stray stone and held it in my fist. I would be the elderly woman's death.
Thank you for listening and delving with me into the dark together.
Please remember to leave a thumbs up and subscribe if you feel so inclined. The more engagement this video gets, the more YouTube will push my content to others.
Thus, the following will grow.
All stories read in this channel will be available on Spotify, iTunes, and just about everywhere else. Links in the description.
Thank you for listening and feeding the cause. We'll be seeing you